Hello and welcome once again to a mini prelude from my studio in downtown Salt Lake, aka my living room. Today's sponsor is Lysol because I was very lucky and found a 4-pack of Lysol wipes at the market today. I couldn't believe my good luck. I'm Carol Anderson. I'm the principal coach of Utah Opera. Typically, I welcome you into the Capitol Theater with introductions to our Capitol Theater presentations during this time of home stay, though I'm coming into your homes through Facebook Live so that I can help introduce you to the operas that we're going to see. We're so grateful for the Metropolitan Opera for making their HD content available free to us during this time of sequestration from our normal gathering places in the theaters and concert halls. So tonight we have The Pearl Fishers by Georges Bizet. Georges Bizet, of course, is the composer we most associate with the beloved opera Carmen. Pearl Fishers is quite a bit earlier in his output. Now, Georges Bizet had a very sadly, tragically short life. He was born in 1838 and died in 1875. So when he died, he never actually saw Carmen become a success, which is a shame because, of course, it did. It was not a success at its premiere, but it became it's now one of the most top 10, possibly even top 5 performed operas across the world. Bizet studied at the Paris Conservatory, where he was applauded both as a pianist and a composer. He studied composition with Charles Gounod, the composer of several operas of his own, including Romeo and Juliet and Faust. He won many prizes, including a prize sponsored by Jacques Offenbach, a composer of operetta. This was a prize where a libretto was provided by Halévy, and then all the entrants were meant to set that. The libretto was called Dr. Miracle, and our friend Bizet was the winner of that prize. Dr. Miracle may be unique in that it's probably the only opera I know of where the character actually makes an omelet. There is, in fact, an omelet quartet there. Incidentally, the connections with the Halévy family did not stop there. He actually married a member of the Halévy family, Geneviève. He was also the winner of the Prix de Rome, which was a prestigious prize awarded well into the 20th century, which carried with it a residency and a stipend to study in Italy. Upon returning to Paris, his career stalled with only Pearl Fishers and La Jolie Fille du Perte making it to the operatic stage. Probably you've never seen La Jolie Fille, and Pearl Fishers it's only recently started to be performed more in the United States. During this time, he ended up having to teach private piano to make ends meet and work as a collaborative pianist or an accompanist, however you wish to call it. Bizet's final opera, Carmen, was premiered in 1875 and was a spectacular failure at its premiere. Bizet died of a heart attack just 3 months later, convinced that he had never had a real operatic success. And I find that so tragic because Pearl Fishers is a lovely, charming piece. And of course, Carmen is one of the great dramatic tour de forces that we ever see on our stage. So the Pearl Fishers was premiered in 1863. Right before this commission happened, he was working on an operatic version of Ivan the Fourth. I think it's Ivan the Terrible. So at the last minute, he got a very late commission to do Pearl Fishers, and so he actually self-plagiarized to facilitate the meeting of his deadline. He got the commission in April, and the premiere was in August, so he was under a time crunch. So some of the music is from the project he was working on, the Ivan the Fourth, and Pearl Fishers is not perfection. It's dramatically not the most compelling. There are some wonderful moments. There's some incredibly evocative music, very colorful music, lots of exoticism, which was a big thing in the 19th century as people were getting more familiar with the cultures of the East. We would call it perhaps cultural appropriation at this point, but during the 19th century, people were just trying to to explore these colors and these settings that were unfamiliar to them. So Pearl Fishers takes place on the island of Sri Lanka or Ceylon at the time. And it's set around a community of seaside villagers who in fact dive for pearls. That's their main industry. There's a love triangle between the chieftain chieftain Zorga, Layla, who is the priestess who is meant to remain chaste and pray for the safety of the village to the god Brahma. And then Nadir is the tenor who bursts on the scene, having been gone for a number of years, and he becomes the other point of the triangle. Of course, you know at least one number likely from Pearl Fishers, and that's the very famous duet that the two men sing. It's another bro duet. I talked about bro duets in Don Carlo, and this is another one of those. So I want to start with a little bit of the opening music, and this is where the village is gathering to welcome back the Pearl Fishers. They've just come back from their hunting or diving or whatever. So we have this kind of exotic sounding music. Tricky. I actually want to, so we've got this melody. So that's a tricky opening there. It's a much more facile for the orchestra, but you get the idea, this sort of ostinato, and there's usually dance associated with that as well. So then I mentioned the bro duet. This is between Zorga and Nadir. They recall, after Nadir has returned unexpectedly, they recall a time that they loved the same woman, and they talk about how nothing will separate them. A woman cannot possibly come between them because their friendship is eternal, and they've sworn eternal fidelity and friendship. So this is that. I love this duet in particular for the role of the harp that happens. It's just these sort of rippling harp arpeggios, and I think it kind of goes along with the idea that this is a beach community, and there's a lot of things that evoke to me water, and this is one of them. So here's a little bit of that duet. Thrilling moment where, especially the second time that the melody comes back, they have this whole middle section where the two of them say nothing's going to separate us, and there's a little bit of, but there is some angst about it, but then they all come back out of all this angsty music into this wonderful, almost religious sounding vow that they swear to one another. A couple of more exotic things that you might hear. Nadir has a wonderful aria where he talks about seeing the memory of seeing Layla back in the day, and it's got a bit of modality in it, so it's not necessarily a traditional minor or major piece. And then there's these wonderful, it's an evening, it's talking about evening experiences, and so there's these moments that to me sound like the crickets that happen in little winds. So I'm going to play the second verse of this. So it's a strophic piece, meaning that there's two verses, and they're pretty much the same with a little bit of variation. And the main variation is the orchestration with these little cricket or frogs or whatever you want to call them. mode. Then we have, I think the role of Layla is a really fascinating one because I feel like it takes almost 3 different sopranos. Obviously, they don't have 3 sopranos doing it typically, but it takes a soprano with a very flexible voice. The first act, she has quite a bit of coloratura, so she needs to be able to have that agility. The second act is she has her beautiful aria, which is quite lyrical, in the vein of, it's not at all musically like Puccini, but it's that type of voice of Mimi or someone like that. And then the third act, she's a dramatic soprano almost. There's a great duet between Zorga and her, sorry, I'm getting my pronouns wrong, where it's super dramatic and it takes a really dramatic voice. So the person who sings Layla has to be able to do more than, say, for instance, if you've experienced the aria, the role is so much more than just the aria. You have to have the agility that isn't displayed in that main aria in Act 2, and you have to have the drama that is displayed in Act 3. So this is the opening. This is the first thing that Layla sings. And so on. So there's those little and then these little runs, and she has to be able to pop up. But then the aria in Act 2 sounds like this. This is a little bit of the introduction, and then I'll make it really clear where the voice comes in. First section of her very lyrical, beautiful aria, Comme autrefois, in the second act. Then a little bit more of exoticism shows up. The Nadir comes in, and there's a passionate love duet between the two of them, but it's brought in by this oboe, and sort of again bordering on the cultural appropriation, but the oboe is often something that would be representing like an exotic. I hate to say this, but like a snake charmer, if you ever hear that in an older movie from an older time. And so the oboe has this beautiful solo, which is nothing to do with snake charming. It's just introducing this wonderful moment where Nadir sings off stage and starts to disturb Layla since she's made a vow of chastity. It's unsettling to her to be reminded of romance. And then we have harp backstage. And that's this beautiful thing, a song that he sings. It's almost like a folk song from backstage. I talked about the character or the music that evokes the ocean that is such a part of this village's life. And there's a storm comes in, which is representing or symbolic of the fact that there's a storm because Layla is a storm within the tribe, because Layla is caught with Nadir by Zurga, and thusly she seems to have broken her vow, and the storm is seen as a punishment from the gods for the fact that their priestess has been unfaithful. So we get these wave music that's really quite delightful as the tribe laments what's happening. To play on a keyboard, which doesn't feel quite like a piano, an acoustic piano, but you get the idea. It's almost like that the Revolutionary Etude of Chopin. It's got that kind of sweep of that piece. Then as the scene continues to become dramatic and the storm rages around, we have this music that builds into a reprise of a chorus that we had in the first act. And this is the chorus. It's a hymn to Brahma, their god. And so it's a really wonderful, there's panic, 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 and then suddenly it bursts into this magical A major hymn. And it's really a great dramatic moment in this act 2 as it builds to its final climax. So this is how that kind of goes. Turn the page. So really, in the first act, it's beautiful and but it's full of joy. In the second act, it comes even more dramatic because it's a cry for help in the midst of their tribe falling apart and their village being endangered. And so it's really a thrilling moment. So that's kind of an introduction to the music and the origin of Bizet's charming and lovely early piece, The Pearl Fishers. I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast, and I thank you so much for joining me. Until I see you in the theater, please remain safe, take care of each other, be very kind, and practice safe social distancing. Thank you.